Video, I'm actually going to switch it up a little bit and use another file, and then I'll come back to this one. This is if you're trying to do a little bit more complicated pattern placement, because as you know, if you place a pattern in like this, it doesn't really look real because the seams aren't respected. Like nobody would ever be able to line things up that perfectly. So by making a little bit offset, you're actually able to make it look more convincing. And also, you can imagine if this was like a stripe pattern, it would look really fake if the fabric matched up perfectly. So instead of starting with this one, which is more complicated because it has all these seams, I set up another file, a much more simpler shape. And in this shape, you can see, oops, sorry. In this shape, you can see the height is here. I already rescaled everything, and I've already made these clipping masks. So these black shapes are called clipping masks. So I basically drew in, on an empty layer, I like drew in a section of the chair that is divided by the seams and filled that with black and called that what it is. So like the seat side, for instance. And the clipping masks are what is going to allow me to change the angle in different areas. So the shadow layer, again, has to be set to multiply so that it's a little bit more convincing. But I don't really want to use the shadow layer yet, because with the clipping mask, it's going to become very confusing that it's all black. So I'm going to leave that on normal for now. Just make it invisible. The seat back, you can see, has been cut off. So that's going to also show you how you have to have the black clipping mask everywhere or else it's not going to work. So I'll leave that as an error that shows you what can go wrong. So basically, to use a clipping mask, it requires this black shape on a transparent ground, and then it could also be a black pattern. It doesn't have to be a shape, but it has to be black on a transparent ground. And then what you're going to do is introduce another layer. So I'm going to select this layer and I'm going to place it in this file. And I'm going to place it above a clipping mask file. So I'm going to place it multiple times. Once it's above the clipping mask layer, when I hover between the two layers and hold down the Option key, it moves it into the clipping mask. So what the clipping mask means is that this layer will only be visible where there's black on the clipping mask layer beneath it. So I'm going to do it for everyone. I'll do it for the side, and I paste it. Option key on the space between and turn it into a clipping mask. So you can see it's going to be much more convincing if it's not lined up. It's also going to be more convincing when I change the angle. The seat side, again, make the clipping mask. And the seat itself, you can see the seat itself is going to be a little bit less convincing because it curves, but I can also show you how to fix that so that there's two clipping masks within the seat. So I'm going to put the shadow layer back on so you can see what this looks like. It's pretty good. I mean, it's not really convincing because of the angle of the seat especially. And you can see where there wasn't a clipping mask, where the black didn't extend, it isn't actually placing the pattern, because as I said, the only place that the pattern would show up here is where there's black. So if you realize you made a mistake, you can always go in to that clipping mask layer and actually add to it. So I'm just going to add to the black there. Edit fill. I usually use shortcuts on the keyboard for that, but see how that added black and therefore allowed for a little bit more pattern coverage. And now I'm going to go to the back side layer and add to that there. You'll notice that there's also some issues down here. So on the seat, I'm going to make the clipping mask contain, contain all of this stuff too. Okay, so back to what I was saying about how this isn't really convincing on the seat because it's not curving. If you think about it, the seat is actually two angles. So instead of having one clipping mask there, I'm going to have two. I'm going to have the seat itself and the seat front. So I'm going to make another empty layer. I'm going to sort of select what I believe to be the front, even though there's not a seam. And I'm going to fill that with black, and then I'm going to put it above the seat so it's not hidden, and then paste another pattern layer, make another clipping mask. So the seat front here is now going to be at the correct angle. So this is at the correct angle, and the seat itself has to shift so that it goes into perspective. So basically what I'm going to do with that layer is go to edit, transform, and do the perspective and show you how you can change the perspective. Now, nobody is going to find that convincing, like, oh yeah, look, the pattern's going back. So instead, you're going to take that and transform the layer by rotating it, and then use the skew tool to visually make it a little bit more convincing. So edit, transform, you can use skew or distort depending on what you're trying to do. So I'll show you what distort does. And all that's doing is making it visually look a little bit more convincing. This is not mapping software, so it's not going to do a perfect job, but you'll see how I'm connecting it to itself there. And basically just giving enough of movement so that it no longer feels like it is two totally separate pieces. It's a continuation of, and hit enter on the keyboard. And then for the seat back, I'm going to also do a little bit of a skew so that it looks like it's getting slightly smaller as it goes back into the background. And then, frankly, I can leave the sides alone if I wanted to. I can move it around into position if I don't like the part that's showing. But that's not really going to be the focus when somebody looks at it. The front is going to be the focus. So I must say that looks pretty good. The only other thing I might do here is adjust the shadow layer so that it's like more pronounced. And that also helps dull the color down a bit. So that would be the chair at the scale of the original pattern. So if I take that same information and go over to this dress, you're going to see that I'm going to need many more clipping masks. But the most important ones are probably the skirt, the cuffs, and the collar. Everything else is going to seem convincing enough. So let me just do super quick clipping masks. We have the cuffs. Sorry. Shift key to add. Cuffs, and it doesn't matter that I made them bigger than the cuffs because it's hidden by the other layers. I'm going to do the collar, just the collar, not the inside of the garment. And again, if you feel like it's not convincing enough, you can always add more clipping masks. And then the last one will be the skirt. So everywhere else is just going to be the pattern flat. Depending on your pattern, it'll show up more or less. So there's the original that's just going in the background, and then I'm going to duplicate that, move it above the skirt layer, turn it into a clipping mask, and actually intentionally offset it so that it looks like it was sewn together. So you don't have to do much, just enough to make it look like it isn't perfectly aligned. Will make it a little bit more convincing. Can you do anything to the skirt to warp it? Absolutely. You learned how to do that before. So you can go to the warp tool and you can add lines where the pleat is happening or the drape is happening, and you could tweak it a little bit there too. Just don't overdo it to make it look warped, but adding a little bit of movement is fine. The next thing that you're going to do is duplicate the original layer again, bring it above the collar, turn it into a clipping mask, and then I'm gonna actually like tilt it so that it's offset there. You'll notice that I did move it to a darker part of the image, so I'm gonna probably move it down so it doesn't look like a different color, and that can be the collar. And then I'm going to duplicate the original one more time for the cuffs so that the cuffs are not perfectly aligned when they're in a clipping mask. I mean, makes a bit of a difference in my opinion. If you feel like, okay, the sleeves are too perfect, or I want to change, the back of the garment so it's not lining up, absolutely add clipping masks for this, but this is giving you enough of an impression of the pattern in the garment for presentation. And of course, a better photograph would go a long way. Okay.